Hello, everyone. For almost 40 years, Channel 4 has been integral to the UK's public service broadcasting ecology. It's offered viewers something different, and it's offered the industry a different model, ordering distinctive programmes entirely from the independent production community. And that may be about to change. There have been several aborted attempts at privatising the broadcaster over the years, and now there is another. The government launched a consultation on Channel 4's future this month, and it has seemingly preempted those findings by indicating that a change of ownership is its preferred outcome. I'm Chris Curtis, the editor of Broadcast, and together with the British Broadcasting Challenge campaign, we are hosting a discussion today that will analyse C4's place in the market, what it does and how it might do more, and assess the implications of privatisation, what those outcomes might be, and how they would impact viewers and the TV industry. Joining me to do that are four well-known figures. Steve Coogan is an actor, comedian, producer, and writer. And as well as playing the monstrous and marvellous Alan Partridge for almost 30 years, he starred in countless acclaimed projects such as Philomena, The Trip, and Stan and Ollie. While off screen, he's helped turn Baby Cow into one of the UK's leading comedy production labels. Claire Enders is arguably the industry's preeminent analyst, leading a business that provides essential insight to the sector's biggest players and acting as a commentator on media issues for all major bulletins and news programmes. She founded Enders Analysis in 1997. Andrew Sheldon is co-founder and creative director of True North in Leeds, which has long been one of the biggest and best independent production labels outside of London. It's a multi-genre producer for a range of customers, with hit series including Devon and Cornwall and A New Life in the Sun. Its success prompted Sky to become a majority stakeholder in 2017. And Marcus Ryder is a hugely experienced news and current affairs executive who is also a leader on the issue of diversity in the media. In that capacity, he is a visiting professor in media diversity at Birmingham City University, where he's integral to the recently launched Lenny Henry Centre for Media Diversity. So thank you to everyone for being here. I'm going to go around each of you in turn before we broaden out the discussion. Steve, I'm going to start with you. In a nutshell, why does Channel 4 matter to creatives in terms of its kind of place and position in British television?
Well, I would say that without Channel 4, then some of the most well-known, appreciated, award-winning excellence in comedy and drama wouldn't have been given a foothold in the industry. There are countless examples of that. My sort of colleagues in this sort of industry, like Sacha Baron Cohen, Peter Kay, Ricky Gervais, would never have been able to launch their careers. Some of the great award-winning, crowd-pleasing comedy shows that they've made would never have happened without Channel 4. So those talents were given a platform there. And because it's not just, it's not beholden to the market or shareholders, it means they can take decisions on a different basis. And the public service remit is really, really important because without that, we don't have this a more holistic view of things. It's just down to the bottom line. And what that does is it makes programs that pander, because that's to be designed to satisfy shareholders, really, ultimately. That means pandering to the widest possible audience, and sometimes that can mean the lowest common denominator. So you can end up with garbage, and that's my great worry. Now, as far as independents are concerned, of course, the kind of programs I like to make, and people and many other independents like to make, are programs that are driven by creativity, driven by a sort of an artistic vision, as much as wanting to earn money, you know. So what it does perfect, I think, Channel is it gets the balance right between art and commerce, and without that, we just end up. We have to have some people who take a sort of who determine or can chance their arm on things that are adventurous and things that the market wouldn't embrace.
Yeah.
So for independents like mine, many others are driven creatively. And also, I'd like to just sort of there's a notion that anything which is not that doesn't survive in the market is therefore doesn't justify itself. It's sort of a part of the free market philosophy, which has many sorts of virtues. Of course, competition it can be very healthy, but the idea that patronage or people like, I mean, William Shakespeare wouldn't have survived if he'd just been left to the market. He was subject to patronage. He was subsidized in writing his plays. So the idea that the idea of supporting these things, these institutions like Channel 4 publicly, is a modern ideological conceit, is nonsense. Anyway, but so independents, of course, need people like Channel 4, because Channel 4, look to them and support them. We support each other in doing programs we believe in, and that's been vindicated. That's a part of Channel 4 that's constantly been vindicated. Anyway.
Lovely, thank you. Claire, I'm going to come to you next. Steve talked about the balance between sort of commerce and creativity. I wonder, Claire, can you characterise for us the wider economic benefits that Channel 4 generates for the TV industry?
Absolutely. Thank you for inviting me to comment on this. So we've done a calculation about the aggregate economic gross value added, GVA, of Channel 4 over its 40-year history, and it comes to a sum of over 30 billion. So when I characterize this as the most successful economic intervention of any government in this country of all time, I am speaking the truth. In 2006, PwC's analysis indicated a GVA of around 2 billion, with around 22,000 jobs supported. Slightly different methodology in 2019. EY found that the GVA was around 1 billion, of which around over a quarter was in the regional economy, supporting over 10,000 jobs. Now, the impact of Channel 4 in these intermediate years has also been measured in different ways. So essentially, we're looking at an extraordinarily wide and measurable economic impact, which is what needs to be set against, of course, the sum that would be realized by the Treasury under a variety of privatization scenarios that I hope we will soon discuss. But I'd also like to highlight, as a woman, as an immigrant to this country in 1982, therefore actually at the birth of Channel 4 and also at the London Business School being taught by Paddy Barwise. So I feel like I've always been part of its history. But the broader economic impact of designing an intervention that not only created a whole new industry, independent production, but also, of course, has empowered underrepresented and ignored groups, of which, of course, I am part of several, which have been systematically discriminated against, and changing societal attitudes towards these underrepresented group. I'm sure we can all remember when the BBC and ITV only had presenters that were white and male, and that was in 1982, and they had effectively a duopoly on some kind of British vision, which was very, very antiquated. Although it still persists, of course, and probably will persist for all time. But the immense impact on the well-being and mojo and dignity of everyone in this country because of Channel 4 has had major intangible economic benefits, entrepreneurship, and so on. And of course, the wider impact of Channel 4 as part of a creative economy, which has grown in double digits for about 15 years. So we're really, Channel 4 is part of an extraordinary ecosystem that has actually powered UK GDP as a whole. So it reaches many parts, but it has also carved out a unique market position for itself, and that provides true choice and to consumers, which is itself helps sustain the wider ecology. Advertisers will tell you that the freeing of Channel 4 from a joint sale with ITV in 1996 created real competition. And indeed, Channel 4 is the exemplar of the public service broadcasting system. Consistently, the public sees it as the clearest public service broadcaster, and the one which they value alongside the BBC to an extraordinary degree. So its economic benefits are wide, and there is no negative. There's been no downside in all of this extraordinary story. Thank you.
Indeed. Thank you for that, Claire. Marcus, I'm going to move on to you. Privatisation is the hot topic at the moment. What's your view, Marcus, on whether privatisation would help or hinder Channel 4 in its ambitions to accelerate improvement in diversity of the British television industry?
First of all, Chris, thank you so much for inviting me onto the panel. To answer that question, I think the lack of diversity in the television industry is due to market failures. It's not due to a lack of good intentions or the actions of individual racists or bigots, which is why so many people love Channel 4 and why we are fighting for it. Channel 4 was set up directly to address market failures in terms of diversity, diversity of programming, diversity of talent, diversity of suppliers. Right? When it launched in 1982, Channel 4 operated under a remit that demanded that it serves, and I quote, tastes and interests not generally catered for by other UK broadcasters, and had a professed, quote, commitment to diversity. It's really written into its DNA. More importantly, it recognized that diversity without inclusion was meaningless, which is why it realized it was not just about increasing the level of melanin, for example, if you're talking about ethnic diversity, but increasing the different voices from Black, Asian, and minority ethnic communities. It is why in the 1980s, it directly funded the Black film collective Chedo, founded by the late Menelik Shabazz. It is why from 1985 to 1991, it broadcast the current affairs series The Bandung Files and employed Darcus Howe and Tariq Ali, both controversial figures. The former, a prominent Black rights activist, seen at one point, if you just watch these Small Axe series that was on BBC, recently, was one point seen as public enemy number one, and the latter, Tariq Ali, an overtly political figure who campaigned against both US imperialism and Israeli imperialism. The question is, would Channel 4 fund the equivalent of Chedo now, and would it employ the equivalent of Darcus Howe and Tariq Ali now? I'll leave that for others to answer, but here are some potential indications of what the answer might be. And it's not great. The truth is in the last 15 to 20 years, with some important notable exceptions, such as the Paralympics coverage and the championing of underrepresented talent like Michaela Cole, Channel 4 has unfortunately been addressing the market failures it was set up to address less and less, right? And if you look at the old triumvirate of BBC, ITV, and Channel 4, Channel 4 is now the only broadcaster not to have a head of diversity on its executive committee. In many ways, it has been the BBC, not Channel 4, who has been at the forefront of increasing regional diversity in the last 15 years and growing the regional indie sector outside of the UK, outside of London, sorry. And with the exception of Caroline Hollick, I do not think Channel 4's CEO committee, executive management board, and the different genre commissioning heads combined, right, have a single Black member. Right? Although I'm happy to be corrected if I'm wrong, right? Mm-hmm. And so it's only just by reading broadcast and looking at that I've seen that it appears that way to me, mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right? So what has happened in the last 20 years of Channel 4's, in the first 20 years of Channel 4's life versus the last 20 years, right? What has happened since its inception of being seen and being expected to be a radical catalyst, right, for change, to now, with its highly mixed and diluted record, if we actually look at the last 20 years? And the answer is simple: the 2003 Communications Act. Now, before I continue, let me pause before we discuss privatisation, because I know that's what I'm meant here to discuss. However, I generally want to discuss the 2003 Communications Act because I think it's really difficult to discuss the privatisation of Channel 4 without looking at this. Fighting Channel 4's privatisation may actually be the wrong battle. Right, the call for Channel 4's privatisation is a response, I believe, to a symptom of a problem and not the cause of the problem. Let me explain. Over the period from 1982 to 2003, Channel 4 was highly regulated, or at least monitored and managed. The list of license requirements kept on growing in what is commonly referred to as Channel 4's remit. By 2001, Channel 4 was required to broadcast every week 4 hours of peak time news, 4 hours of current affairs, 7 hours of formal education. In my interest, 3 hours of multicultural content and 1 hour of religion. Most of these quotas were comfortably exceeded in 2001. My education by 5 hours a week, the obligation to supply 330 hours of schools programming a year was oversubscribed by 235 hours, right? That's almost double. But then came the Communications Act, which brought the creation of a new regulator, Ofcom. And with that began a period of completely different regulatory environment for Channel 4, right, and the other broadcasters. And let me be more specific, right? What you have with that is that by the time we get to 2016, you have more or less done away with a large part of the remit of the quotas that were set in place.
Yeah.
Right. You have done away with the multicultural quota. You've done away with the religious quota. Right. A lot of the other quotas, the regulator is a lot more lax in the way it's enforced. Right. And so you have a completely different channel. So I think that, and so you might ask yourself, why am I fighting for Channel 4 not to be privatized? The reason being is that a publicly owned channel is easier to regulate and it's also more publicly accountable. Right? And so for those reasons, right, I want Channel 4 to return to its radical roots. I want Channel 4 to return to the channel that it was back in the 80s and back in the 90s. But that is not solved by merely saying it shouldn't be privatized.
Yeah.
It's solved by creating a regulatory environment, which it had previously, right? And those two things combined can bring Channel 4 back to the channel that we know and love.
Yeah.
But if we're only fighting against privatization, then I think we're only fighting half the battle. And so we need to fight both things.
You would say public ownership is more effective than private ownership in terms of trying to ensure that C4 returns back to being this radical catalyst for change that you are so keen for it to become again.
Absolutely, but it will only work if that is enforced by a strong regulator and a strong regulatory environment.
Yeah, and we'll talk a little bit hopefully later on about the remit and the nature of that remit and what and if and how it might evolve. Thank you, Marcus. Andrew, I'm going to come to you. True North, very successful independent production company. You make a lot of shows for a lot of different broadcasters. You make for the BBC, you make for MTV. There are lots of channels out there to sell to. So why is Channel 4 so important to the independent production community?
I think, I mean, for me, the big thing is that they're the ladder for people to kind of grow their companies creatively. We you know, the story of True North is one of 2 or 3 people building 250, and Channel 4 has been a constant during that process. And at different points, they've engaged with us in ways that I couldn't imagine any other broadcaster would in the UK, and that's been absolutely critical to the growth of the company. And I think one of the things that is tangible at the moment is that, you know, post the kind of decision to put the NHQ out there to go to Bristol, to go to Glasgow and so on, there is a absolutely tangible sense of momentum that's been built around the presence of Channel 4, certainly in the north of England. Now, the reality is they're not actually here in any kind of full-blown way yet. But their mere presence in the north of England has created a sense of momentum around the television industry. And that's got to be good, not just for those people that work in the television industry, but for the kind of north of England and the other nations and regions, you know, as a whole. You know, I think that the government applauded, you know, the Channel 4's decision to come out of London in 2017. You know, and the reason they applauded it was because it looked like it would give opportunity to people not just to see themselves on the television screen, but to kind of take part in making those programs and to you know, enjoy the economic benefits of making those programs. And I think the thing that I'm most disappointed about this conversation taking place so early is that you know, I think what's changed for the government when we're talking about a government that's, slogan is levelling up. Well, this looks like levelling down from the north of England.
And would you?
It looks like a reversal of a process that actually was going to be successful. So.
And presumably, Andrew, you'd be nervous that if Channel 4 were bought by a organisation, a profit-making organisation, a commercially more ruthless organisation, that it would look at that nations and regions push and potentially not understand why it was important, or consider it an unwarranted cost, or certainly sort of row back from where C4's at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, I can't imagine which buyer would want to take on the remit as we're discussing it. I can't imagine anybody wanted to take that on in a commercial sense. It absolutely has to be legislated, I think, and I think in some respects I'd quite look to the government to kind of say, okay, well, let's do something really radical. Why don't you move Channel 4 completely out of London? Why don't, yes, retain, and the ads and so on, retain a great London office, but you could actually. It'd be quite a statement to say, actually, we're the only broadcaster that's based out of London. When it comes to representing the rest of the country, I think that's a really important thing. If you were kind of around in the late 1990s, I come from an ITV background originally, and you look at the great shows that were made by Granada and by Tyne Tees and by kind of Central and so on, and it was genuinely representative. And I suspect we had, better portrayal and representation in some respects then than we do now. And I think there's a sense at the moment that tide went out, but is now coming back in because Channel 4 are actually pushing against this agenda. And I think it'd be a great shame if we lost it again.
Very good. Thank you. Okay. Thanks to all the panelists. We've heard from each of you in turn. We'll open the conversation up a little bit now. Claire, I'm going to come to you. Marcus talked about the remit in some detail, and Ender's analysis has described Channel 4's remit as fuzzy. I wonder if you could sort of elaborate on that a little.
Yeah, so I mean, actually, I think Steve was referring to, everybody's been referring to it in the right way. It is a very, very broad remit. It has been broadly painted from the word go. There's so many different elements of it. The publisher-broadcaster model is one element. The requirement to maximize expenditure on productions is another, and so on. So we've seen a number of these different elements, but I have to say that our view is that Channel 4's remit as an audience purveyor is very well understood after 40 years by the advertising community, and is in fact the locus of the value that is generating, obviously in total, around £1 billion of income for Channel 4 a year. So we do not live in arbitrary markets. Those markets are not artificially subsidized by advertisers. So Channel 4 has made itself sustainable on a commercial basis, which it has been for 40 years, and through some really traumatic events, 2008, 2010, a financial crash in particular, but also the pandemic last year. And actually the pandemic proved how sensible it is to be a publisher broadcaster and to be able to be very, very flexible about how you order programs. So I think the Channel 4's various elements conceived in 1982 have actually been extraordinarily helpful to it at various critical stages, which would have sunk an organization perhaps that was actually privately owned. So I think there's been a lot of protection in that. And also, I think that the really notable element is that lack of IP ownership has actually not hindered the long-range financial sustainability of Channel 4, nor has its model. So, but notwithstanding that, I think that it is really simplistic at this stage, given what I know about the 3 to 4 willing buyers in this market for Channel 4. I think that to say that that audience remit, which I distinguish from the lack of IP ownership, is something that all the buyers are very keen to sustain. And the advertisers would probably insist on Channel 4 sustaining much of its current remit because it's financially successful on that basis. And may I put to you, because I do also run a business, that if you were to combine Channel 4 and Channel 5, or to combine Channel 4 and STV, or to combine Channel 4 with ITV or with Sky, wouldn't it be relatively straightforward for those organizations to find 10, 15% of costs from electricity, uplinks, suppliers of the building, things like that, lighting, anything you want, those kinds of combinations, which would guarantee much of what Channel 4 does, because I can promise you the government will only be interested in a transaction that sustains the leveling up agenda and which does not turn the clock back on any of the elements that we've actually been discussing. What I'm talking about specifically here is the terms of trade as they apply to some of the 274 suppliers of Channel 4 in its previous financial year, of which 2/3 had revenue of under 5 million. I have to say that the transactors, possible transactors I've spoken to, understand that the terms of trades are best applied to those small companies and that they should be sustained. So I hope that I'm trying to persuade you that the best way for Channel 4 to be sustainable would be with a new 10-year license, since its license currently ends at the end of 2024. So if the government is prepared to give regulatory certainty, prominence, a new 10-year license early to Channel 4 and the whole commercial public service broadcasting sector, that is the best way of increasing the value of Channel 4 and sustaining all of the missions that have changed but are still fundamentally distinctive and very well understood, in fact, by the commercial sector and by acquirers of Channel 4.
But Claire, if you're doing all those things to maintain Channel 4, that means keeping it the same. So why is there, if you, as you've already previously argued, that you feel it is commercially sustainable, why would you need to privatise then if you're doing all those things to maintain the system as it is?
You don't need to privatise Channel 4 at all. As I said, the best way to keep, I mean, it's obvious, the best way to keep the GVA which it provides and all of these intangible benefits is to keep it exactly as is, extremely well managed. I mean, yes, it goes with the times, it has crises, it has to rebuild its reserves. It has wasted tons of money. I mean, I can tell you in the 2000s, 500 million was blown away by management. So it's made its mistakes. It no longer makes that many mistakes. It certainly hasn't made any in the last 8 years. It has not been able to make any business mistakes. So yes, absolutely. In our hands, in the public's ownership, it's manifestly in our benefit. But the government has been very clear that it favors an option which takes it out of government ownership for whatever reason, and not on the basis of sustainability, but more on the basis of this is what we want to do and we've already made up our minds. So using that energy to try to find a solution that manifestly prolongs commercial public service broadcasting, which Channel 4 is a part of, and then means that the government is only faced with the charter of the BBC in 2025 rather than an onrush of very difficult issues. I think that's the best way to sustain public service broadcasting in this country. And by far the best way to sustain Channel 4 is for it to have an unambivalent owner.
Okay, good. Thank you for that. Let's talk content for a little bit. Andrew, I'm going to come to you, and then afterwards, Steve, I'll come to you. We've talked about C4. I'm interested in C4's position in the market with regards to the type of ideas that it develops. And we've talked about the remit. We've talked about C4 historically being a sort of champion of underrepresented voices or distinctive, different kind of programming. Andrew, does that still chime today in terms of the ideas that you develop and pitch to Channel 4?
Yeah, I mean, very much so. But I think that the critical thing for Channel 4 has always been, hasn't it? It's trying to balance, the commercial model, which means putting eyeballs in front of the TV, against being able to do that stuff. And it's something that I think, it's trodden the line very, very well. I think down the years, it's occasionally gone one side or the other. But in general, I think you would still look, and you'd look at shows and think, well, that might not be the commercial success, but it's a creative and it's a cultural success. And then you look at other shows and you'll say, well, where's the edge to that? But actually, it's bringing a lot of viewers to the screen. So it's kind of, and I think they managed to tread that line very well. And I think the critical thing about that is that if you're dealing with, 300 independent production companies, you by its nature are going to get far more diversity of kind of ideas and thought than you ever will be by trying to kind of drag it down to 20 or 30 people, or even kind of pulling the whole thing in-house. I mean, the in-house conversation is really interesting from my point of view, in that we were one of the kind of that first wave of growth fund companies where they were allowed to take a minority stake. And there was always, obviously, the conversation with Ofcom was always, well, what is a minority stake? Because they don't want to have 49% because that'd be too much. Where do we land that? And I think that's certainly one of the areas that might be allowing them to take a greater stake in companies and have a greater influence in companies might be something that going forward, could become reality. I think the problem is if you allow them to take a majority stake in companies, you'll end up with quite quickly with a kind of in-house production department that, and that will limit the number of opportunities for the kind of smaller indies. Stuart Cosgrove, bless his cotton socks, is now no longer at Channel 4. We had a conversation with him, must be nearly 20 years ago, where he sort of said, there are 1,000 indies in the UK, and Channel 4 will deal with 300 of them. 30 of them will get most of the work, but the others will always kind of be, they'll be on the ladder to get that, to join that top 30. And I think that's a really critical part of the kind of ecosystem for broadcasting in Britain. And I don't look at the BBC, however much they do, occasionally kind of take a push out of London. I just don't look at the BBC doing the same stuff at all, really. I think, you look at Salford, which is a magnificent world-class broadcasting centre, but it's like the kind of stockade in Dances with Wolves. It's in the middle of it's just nowhere, really. And it's not having a tangible impact outside of the kind of geographical area it sits in. It's not suddenly kind of led to the indie community in Manchester becoming vibrant. And the reality of Channel 4, and because of the diversity of supply that they're committed to have, means that they've got to engage with those companies. So it does mean that you've got a chance, if you're a company in Hartlepool, of getting to talk to a commission editor. Whereas there's nowhere else. Because
decision makers have moved. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Andrew. Steve, most of your work's been for the BBC over the years, but you've got a forthcoming show on Channel 4, Chivalry. It feels very much in that sort of mode of trying to reflect modern Britain back to itself. Does that feel like a distinctive kind of Channel 4 project to you?
Yeah, I'm not. I just want to sort of qualify this by saying I'm not on here to sort of plug my show, but it is. I think it is an example. The show is written by me and Sarah Soleimani, and we have a diverse cast, and but it is tackling the, if you like, post Me Too landscape in terms of sexual politics, and which is, a sort of political hot potato, and something that people feel that there's no rewards in even talking about it. So there's a lot of people who just think the best policy is just keep your mouth shut, because it's full of pitfalls. Channel 4, took a gamble on this because they like the scripts, and although we use comedy, and we don't, it's not just virtue signaling. There's a if you like a pendulum that goes both ways, and it's a kind of a, why Channel 4 is good is because I think the show reflects Channel 4 at its best when it is doing the things that Marcus said it should do, and also trying to be accessible, but being very adventurous at the same time. That's sort of a difficult circle to square, but it can be done. And I believe that the show I'm making is an example of that, which is, using comedy judiciously to sugar the pill of difficult and potentially problematic subject matter, and that's what it is. And Channel 4
and that's not a mainstream proposition, is it? That's not something that you would necessarily.
No, I don't think the BBC would. The BBC would see a few net gains and a lot of pitfalls, and on that basis, we'll probably say no. Channel 4 say, this is, and Caroline Hollick in particular, sort of with some guidance from her, because it is a complex landscape to talk about openly, that she gave us guidance in that, and we're very hands-on in a way that it was very healthy for the show. We were sort of halfway through filming, but it's it's precisely the right thing, which is making also ensuring that people do talk about, because all these things like Me Too and BLM and this sort of modern landscape we're in. These subjects are actually sometimes you realise that these subjects are only being discussed by the metropolitan elite, and in actual fact, it's important to get these topics to sort of push them out there and make them accessible. So, and to me, the sort of holy grail of good broadcast content is trying to get that balance between, there's no point just sort of being virtuous in an echo chamber. You have to try and reach those people who wouldn't ordinarily think about the things that you're talking about. And so if I'm being cynical, comedy can be a Trojan horse where you can get people without knowing it. Suddenly they're talking about stuff that they hadn't even considered before. And Channel 4's, it's exactly I'm saying it myself, but it's the kind of program that they do very well, and I hope this will contribute to those who want to. And I do agree with Marcus about the. By the way, as a sort of side, is that there has been a sort of over the last 20 years, I certainly have been thinking, hang on, what's going on with Channel 4? Having been a real champion of it in the early days, some of the edge and representation, certainly I started to see things slip, and I thought, so I think actually that the best thing for Channel 4 is reinvention. And reinvention. What form that takes, I don't know. But I'm always suspicious of the market, because sometimes these things, people acquire things and make a statement about all their virtuous intentions, and 5 years later it just gets chucked out the window, and they and it's all history. And you think, what the hell happened? So I'm always suspicious of that. And it's not about no change. It's not sort of. It's about the right kind of thing, and I think certainly a sort of reboot of its values in some way is needed.
Very good, Marcus. I'm going to come back. It's a very opportune moment to come back to you. That's exactly the sort of thing that you were talking about. Let's talk about that a bit more then. Channel 4's got its Black to Front Day coming up, where they are showcasing, spotlighting talent on and off screen from ethnic minority backgrounds. I know that you've contributed and sort of tried to help shape that. What's your view on that? I mean, is that exactly the kind of thing they should be doing? Is it a heavy-handed example, of a one-off initiative, and then it will slip back to where it was? What's your take on that kind of thing, and how lasting change might be brought about?
I think it's exactly the kind of thing it should be doing. If it does it again the following week, or does it again the following month, or does something similar the following year. And so if it's just a one-off, then it is not fulfilling, it won't create lasting change. So it clearly needs to get out of the remit of it being a gimmick. Otherwise it will be no more representative of when occasionally you see the cabinet, having a meeting outside of Westminster, and that's not looking at proper regional or out of London or out of Westminster politics, so it would be no more effective than that. So it needs to ensure that anything that it does with regards to diversity or anything like that is lasting and sustainable. I think Channel 4 has a natural tension in that, as I said, if you look at its the document when it was launched, it says it's to serve the taste and interests not generally catered for, right? And it's got this remit, as I said, up until 2001 of multicultural programming, right? In 2014, interestingly, it had a document which announced that it is the alternative mainstream channel, right? And what it was trying to do was reach out to mainstream audiences with an alternative perspective, but connect with a mainstream audience. Now, if you have an economic model where you're predominantly being funded by advertisers, what you're looking for, without strong regulation, is large audiences. You'll sometimes take a few creative risks, obviously, but your economic imperative will be that you'll take an alternative perspective that will appeal to a large audience in order to get eyeballs, as opposed to looking for niche audiences, which is what Netflix does, because it then benefits by having niche subscribers, right? And so, again,
that's a balance, isn't it? That's a balance that Channel 4's always tried to. I mean, I watched a documentary on Channel 4 the other night about sex trafficking that did 500,000 overnight viewers, and they would have known that when they commissioned that it will not have been a rating success. So there is plenty of examples of that kind of content still. You would
absolutely
agree?
No, absolutely. So it is. So it's a balance. It's completely a balance. So the fear is that without strong regulation, the economic imperative will be to go for eyeballs, right? And if it's privatized, that economic imperative might be even stronger. But even with its current model, without strong regulation, it's really hard not to keep on resisting the temptation to go for larger audiences and to be an alternative mainstream channel, as opposed to a mainstream channel for underrepresented audiences.
Yeah.
But you're right. There's that natural tension, and good regulation helps shape that tension.
Yeah, and by good regulation, what I'm taking from what you're saying, which I think is interesting, is you mean more precise regulation, right? You mean regulation that is more quantifiable and therefore more measurable.
Yeah.
Very good. Okay. Look, we're moving towards the final few minutes of our discussion. So a few questions that I'd be interested in hearing views on in general from across the panel. There is a sense in the consultation document, and indeed from what's going on in the TV landscape around the world at the moment, that bigger is better. That Channel 4 needs greater economic scale. It needs to be able to spend more on programming. I wonder what the view of the panel is on that. Andrew, perhaps I'll come to you on that, and then in fact I'll whiz around the panel if I may, Andrew, and then perhaps I'll come to Steve. Is bigger necessarily beautiful when it comes to content?
No, I mean that's unfortunately that's the challenge that all our sort of linear broadcasters are facing, isn't it? In that they're throwing, my sense of it, which isn't a macro one, it's a sort of micro one in lots of ways, but my sense of it is that they're throwing money upstairs trying to compete with the kind of streamers who've got significantly deeper pockets, and that's having a downward impact, I think, on the kind of more regular indies, if you like, that elsewhere in the country. I mean, I think one of the things is that you that goes back to the question of what's Channel 4 actually for. And what's the point of the remit? And for me, I know that I don't look to Channel 4 to be a kind of globally commercially successful organization. I'd look to it to tread that path where it's doing things that are creatively really brilliant, but at the same time has got a kind of is offering a ladder to indies to get into that world, and that's how I want it to kind of stay. Really, I know that the weird thing, strange thing is that the Out of London thing, and I don't think we should overlook that they spent, the local authorities around the UK spent a lot of public money trying to secure Channel 4 in the first place. The Out of London thing was a thing of absolutely tangible civic pride for all these different cities and around the UK, and I think that tells you a great deal that people want to be part of Channel 4 and want Channel 4 to be part of them, and short of Leeds United getting back in the Premier League, Channel 4 coming to Leeds is probably the best sort of shop window thing we've had in the north of England for quite a long time. So I think it's there's a lot of different facets to the conversation, I think, but I do in the end I'd kind of I hope it sustains in something like its current form, taking on board Max's comments about it needing perhaps a different type of regulation, but I do hope it stays as it is.
Very good. Very good, thank you. Steve, quickly, in terms of the streamers, Netflix out there, they flash their cash at you, but you tell us about the Channel 4's place there from a creative perspective.
I think the streamers are all good and it's very good for the industry, but Channel 4 is like the BBC, but differently, is unique, and it has been made. We've seen how quantifiable it is. Claire was saying before that the benefits it has. I think that I'd be loath to see it grow. Really, I like the fact that it's small enough at the moment to be able to be flexible and agile, and basically, as Andrew said, it is that sort of that portal for talent that can't be sort of valuated in strictly commercial terms, and has always been that. And you only see the benefits of that because later on, because they take a gamble on something which you can't measure commercially, and then are sort of vindicated as time goes by. So I think it needs to be, in some ways, you need to, I think, rebooting it, but not meddling with it too much, but re-establishing those core values that it started out with.
Very good, thank you, Claire. You talked about a potential merger, but it seems to one of the things I took from what you were saying is that preserving the distinctiveness of Channel 4 is important, rather than it becoming just more of the same in terms of the other broadcasting options that we have in the UK.
That's absolutely right. And to your question, to be very specific, Netflix is spending $17 billion a year this year on programming, which is just about the entire turnover of the UK pay TV and broadcast sectors, and a lot more combined. So we're living in a completely different environment. And the whole issue of scale, given that the FANGs have increased value by over 300% in the last 5 years, whereas the entire media sector of the world, all the companies have increased value by only 15%. We're looking at completely different equations. And yes, for the last 100 years, European governments, the Japanese, many countries have understood that the US has always had a very disproportionate scale in the entertainment industry, and that you have to have regulatory constructs to protect local languages, local cultures, local values. I mean, I, as an immigrant here, I've been here for almost 40 years, but what I'm saying is we came up with a very interesting argument earlier this year about how there's a very, very distinctive British PSB dignity about portrayal of people, which is completely distinctive, completely our culture. And it compares, dare I say it, as a viewer, very favorably with certain elements of Netflix or Amazon and so on, or the other elements of the pay TV business, which have a much, much broader construct in terms of portrayal, for instance, of sexual violence against women or objectification of women that you ever see on PSB, which is why some women find it extraordinarily comforting never to turn Netflix on at all. So the fact is that the scale issue is one that the government is using. You have to ask yourself a very different question. What is the best thing for Channel 4 to continue with all these missions? It must be to be free of government interference, to have a new 10-year license, to have prominence, and to sustain as many of its missions and for the entire industry to work for this outcome, rather than to leave it languishing with a government that basically criticizes it on a cyclical basis and has had an ideological objection to interventions in broadcasting, whether you call that the BBC or Channel 4, for the longest time possible. I mean, since Rupert Murdoch entered into the debate in 1984, it's been all over. This government, the Tory party, has at best ambivalence and at worst complete negativity about the ownership of very, very high quality, wonderful public service broadcasting assets, which give all of us a lot of benefit.
Yeah, thank you. And Marcus, I'm taking from your contributions that the privatisation debate is a moment for the industry perhaps to reconsider Channel 4, and that this can be a moment where, if the privatisation debate can be held simultaneously around a desire to reinvent, to rethink, to reimagine Channel 4, that might represent a significant opportunity, and an opportunity perhaps best served under public ownership. I wonder if that your view to conclude on that as this is an opportunity to reimagine Channel 4.
Yeah, I think it will be a massive lost opportunity if we just focus on privatization, yes or no. Right? That can't be the debate. It has to be a broader debate as to what should Channel 4 be giving us? What should be the broadcasting ecology, which doesn't just include Channel 4? And what do we want from our PSBs? You know, if that's the debate, then I am very happy to dive in literally head first, right? And that's great. And I think it's a harder debate to have if Channel 4 is privatized, right? But as I said, if the debate is really privatization, yes or no, I think it is a massive lost opportunity.
Very good. Well, thank you to the panel for joining us today. To those of you watching, the consultation, the DCMS consultation on the future of Channel 4 runs until the 14th of September. Marcus talked there about diving into the debate. Each and every one of you, every member of the public, every stakeholder, every independent production community, company, every broadcaster, anyone involved with the TV industry, or indeed the general public, has an opportunity to contribute to that consultation. And if you have strong views about the future of Channel 4, I would urge you to make them known to your local MP and to the DCMS. Thank you so much to the panel for your time. It's been a fascinating debate, and I'm sure there's plenty more mileage to come as we assess C4's future prospects. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.